Hello, I'm Will Yeoman. I'm CEO of Writing WA, and welcome to another episode of Pod Street, Writing WA's official podcast. And as we often find ourselves, we're in the State Library of WA on the second floor today, and it's our great privilege to welcome Louise Helfgott, who is the author of the memoir Thistledown Seed. Okay, so, there's a lot to talk about in this book. It's not just the story, but the writing itself is magnificent. For those of you who haven't read it, I should also say that it was shortlisted for the West Australian Premier's Book Awards only this year as well. So, Louise, welcome to Pod Street.
Thank you very much, Will. It's great to be here.
Now, I guess the first question is why and why now? Clearly, it's such an important story that needed to be told, but okay, why did it take this long for you to get to it and set it down in this way?
The story has been brewing in me for many, many years. One of the things that perhaps delayed the telling of the story, there were a couple of things. First of all, the making of the movie Shine, based on my family.
Oh, sorry, we should remind listeners who maybe
Yes.
don't know that David Helfgott, the celebrated pianist, is your brother.
Correct, that's right. And so when Shine came out, I found that it discouraged me in some ways, prevented me in some ways from telling my own story. But I had, at that point, written a version of my story in play form, because I wrote a lot of drama before I went back to writing books.
Yes.
And then a trip to Poland set it off. So the story, as I said, had been brewing in me for many years. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to tell it. And if I had have written it earlier, I think I would have written it in a more of a straight memoir form. But going to Poland, I felt it was really necessary to add that dimension in of someone pursuing the ghosts of their past, if you like, trying to uncover and untangle mysteries in family, and just really trying to find out more about my family background, but also to feel a sense of the country from which they had come from, and where so many atrocities actually happened to their family members. So I think the trip to Poland really brought out much more emotion than I had expected, and I started keeping a diary of those feelings and what I was uncovering, which led to thinking back about my early life and relating some of those stories to my early life. And then I felt something was missing, because I already had two strands of Thistledown Seed at that point. I felt something was missing. There was another party to this story that needed to be told, that needed to come out. And then I realised that it was a story about my two aunts, because in many ways growing up I felt the shadow of them in our lives, and my mum would talk about them all the time. They were real, they were her sisters.
Yes.
And I felt it was necessary to somehow pay tribute to them. They had lost their lives at such a young age. To me, it was very important to uncover a little bit more information about what they may have been like, based on memories of my mum, and going through the archives in Poland and trying to get more information about them. So that's how the story evolved, and that's why it took a long time for me to come back to it. So I really perhaps would have done this a lot earlier had it not been for Shine.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So to what extent would you characterise this as a Holocaust memoir, or is it simply a family memoir to whom or to which these enormous upheavals have occurred? Because there's also the often fractious relationship between your brother and the rest of the family as well. That's a great source of tension too. So there are multiple layers there, aren't there?
There definitely are. It's not just a Holocaust memoir, but the Holocaust is there because it determined the destinies of my family in so many important ways. And like what a lot of Indigenous people talk about, and I work a lot with Indigenous people,
Right.
The intergenerational trauma is always there. It's underlying. So the intergenerational trauma meant that my father never talked about his early days in Poland. He didn't talk about, at least to me, about what life was like there. He never talked about his family. I felt, again, we had to research to find out who was actually in his family. It meant that my mum had lost connection to her family, to some extent, to her family of origin. And so the Holocaust was very determining. And if it wasn't for my father's love of music, we wouldn't have been here in the first place, because he, along with the rest of his family, would have probably perished in the Holocaust. And it was only because of his love of music that he escaped, that he ran away in his teenage years. And hence we were born. So, but I felt that the story about, so telling my story meant that I also needed to dig deeper into my family memories, and I felt Shine didn't do justice to the many different strands of our life, and also didn't do justice to the complexity of my father's character. And so that was another motivating factor for writing Thistledown Seed. I mean, I thought it was a great movie. I thought it, and it gave David back the life that illness had taken away from him. So I will never resent the movie, but I do feel that it didn't do full justice. And in fact, the director had said that to me afterwards. He said that if they had the funding, I think they originally only had $6 million to do the film. So he said if they had the funding, he would have started the movie back in Poland when my father smashed a violin.
Yes.
So that's,
which would have been quite powerful.
It would have been extremely powerful.
Indeed.
So yeah, there was a lot he left out.
Yes, and I guess you're right. It is difficult to expect, a 2 or even 3 hour film to encompass all those complexities in the way that a book can.
Exactly.
So
That's
absolutely right. So am I right in saying then, for you personally, is there like a pre-Poland visit, Louise, and then a post-Poland visit, Louise? Like, how much of that actually physically being there changed you?
It gave me the impetus. It gave me the strong emotional pull, and I've always been passionate about writing.
Yes.
I've always been passionate about literature and the arts. Going to Poland was such an emotional experience for me, which I hadn't probably predicted that it would be. So it really gave me inspiration. It meant that instead of sleeping, I was up watching, the landscapes change as in the train going into Poland. It meant that afterwards I'd be lying in bed thinking, where did this happen and what happened here? So there was that. I felt driven after that. I felt that it was something that absolutely had to be done, and it had to be done now.
No, so in other words, it really inspired you on this path.
Yeah.
And look, so how has the book been received? I mean, it was published in 2022. I mean, I'm just really curious, because it is one of those very powerful stories that affected so many generations. And for it to be out there in the world, I mean, well, okay, let's take it back one step. How did you feel on the brink of publication? You must have been, like a lot of writers, very nervous and anxious about how it was going to be received. And then finally, how was it received?
Exactly. There was all of that nervous anticipation, and I knew that, there would be some difficulty for, family members as well.
Yes.
But I did tell them beforehand, and I did show them a copy beforehand.
Okay, right.
So I was very clear on doing that. I didn't know exactly how it would be received, but the feedback that I have had has been nearly all positive. I haven't had too many any negative feedback, really, which has surprised me because I thought I would get more negative feedback on the actual writing or on the actual book.
Yes.
It's also brought people from my past out that I never thought I would see again.
Wow.
In fact, they turned up at the launch. So people I'd gone to school with turned up at the launch that we had for it in Perth that Beaufort Street Books organised for us, and they did a wonderful job. And I was delighted to see them. I was so happy that the book has actually put me in contact with some people who I thought I would never have contact with again. So I'm quite happy with the response that I've received.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, often books can do that. They become catalysts, don't they, for much broader repercussions, particularly when it brings people together who otherwise the paths might not have crossed again.
Exactly.
It's quite wonderful, isn't it?
It is, and people who I went to school with were actually reaching out to me.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one person actually said, "Look, if I've ever said or had done anything to upset you, I'm really sorry." So I was like, "Okay, but you didn't need to apologise."
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes.
So yeah, but no, it's been really emotional, really. So we had 2 launches. We had one in Perth and we had one in Mandurah because I live there and I know a lot of people there, and a lot of people from there wouldn't have come to the Perth launch. So, and we had a very big turnout in Mandurah. We had the Minister for Arts, David Templeman.
David was there, yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Also, because I've worked on other projects with him in the past, so it made sense, and he agreed to do it. So, yeah, that also went really well. Completely different to the Perth launch.
Yes.
But very,
well, this is good.
Yeah, it was good.
So let's get back to the writing, because you're a playwright as well, and I'm wondering, we do like to talk a little bit about the craft of writing, because we like to hopefully inspire other writers and to give them some tips and some advice if we can, even if it's indirectly, by talking about the craft. I mean, first of all, do you make a distinction between writing for the stage and writing for the page?
The inspiration is different.
Yes.
I was commissioned by the Catherine Susanna Pritchard Centre a few years ago to write a play honouring Catherine Susanna Pritchard for the 50th anniversary of her death.
Yes.
That took place in 2019. And I wrote it as a dialogue, basically, between my brother and her, because my brother used to visit her. So as a 5-year-old child, I remember my brother walking back from Greenmount and after he'd visited her and missed the last bus. So that was always there. So the inspiration for writing that play was extremely different to the inspiration for writing Thistledown Seed, even though they were different angles, if you like, or different perspectives on family history and family stories.
Yes.
When I write plays, I tend to have the inspiration of characters. I tend to see and hear them, and it's more of a visceral process. I get very involved and the play starts writing itself once I've started. The characters start talking and then I see where they're going. So it's just...
Is it necessarily more dialogue based because it's a play?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
It is. And it's also what's not said that you can actually portray through expressions, through,
Of course, on the stage you have the people standing right before you in a way you don't if you're just reading the book, and you have to conjure that up in your imagination, don't you? Otherwise. Exactly.
So it is a slightly different process, but I think that in coming back to writing Thistledown Seed, I think that a lot of the work that I had done in writing drama impacted in the way that I wrote Thistledown Seed, because there's different scenes. It's scenic in that sense, rather than a straight narrative. And so I think that my writing of drama and also my musical background,
yes, of course,
had a large impact in the way that I approach prose now and the way that I write stories. I'm working on different stories, and it's almost like a musical feel. For me, it's like, okay, there's a beat to it, and there is a parts of where the music stops and where it resumes again. So
that's really interesting.
And it has that rhythm.
The rhythm is very important.
So rhythm is very important. So I think that the rhythm of my drama writing impacts also on the way that I have written the book. And when in writing plays, I have often ended a scene in the middle, so where there is a sense of what's going to happen, there's a pause, and I think that I also took that in when I was writing Thistledown.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you brought up the musical aspect, because as someone who's also interested in music, it struck me as being a little bit like a three-part fugue or a three-part invention, where you've got these different strands in counterpoint with each other. They're using the same theme, but they have their own variations, don't they?
Absolutely.
I really felt that, so yes.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I haven't played a lot of Bach. I love the romantic composers more, but I absolutely see what you mean by that. It definitely does have that.
So the big question, and if I may, the last question is, what are you working on now, if you can share that with us? What's next for Louise Helfgott?
I'm working on I don't normally talk about it.
Okay.
But
you can be as vague as you want then.
But I have written quite a lot of it already.
Right, okay.
And it's going back to the early days of the colonisation of Western Australia through the perspective of my husband's family, which is 6 generations in WA. So they arrived in 1829, 1830, and on the ship Rockingham. And it's also quite intergenerational.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's what I'm working on.
In a sense, it's the missing jigsaw piece in this puzzle that is your life.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
But I think that it's a story that also needs to be told.
Yes, okay.
And what I like about working on this is that, as I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of contact with Indigenous people. I co-coordinate a group on a voluntary basis called Coolbardie's Talking, which is a meeting place for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women, not started by me, but started 26 years ago. And Sandra Hill, the well-known Indigenous artist, asked me to write a play back then, which became A Closer Sky, which was later then nominated for an Augie Award.
Yes.
And so I've been working with a lot of Indigenous people over the years and have been asked to write some of their stories, which they have wanted me to write and asked me to write. And I feel that I also am able to bring that in to the current project. So,
wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at? Hopefully 2025 maybe?
I have no idea.
Whenever it's finished. Okay.
Exactly.
Out there. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on Pod Street. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Will.
You're welcome.
Thank you.